Quicken Loans created Rocket Mortgage. It lets you apply simply and understand the entire mortgage process fully, so you can be confident you're getting the right mortgage for you. To get started, go to rocketmortgage.com/Amanpour.
Tonight, he almost made enemies out of his friends at the G7 summit in Canada. So will President Trump make friends out of his enemies when he comes face to face with North Korea's leader right here in Singapore? My exclusive interview with the leader hosting this historic nuclear summit, the Singaporean Prime Minister Hsien. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the program. I'm Amanpour in the city-state of Singapore, which is playing host to what could be a highly significant summit between President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. And as he has done from the beginning of this process, the North Korean dictator seems to be setting the tone. An extraordinary walkabout downtown for this reclusive leader from the Hermit Kingdom, waving and looking confident just hours ahead of the meeting. It's the only country besides China that he's visited as leader. All smiles, he even took a selfie with Singapore's foreign minister. President Trump was holed up at his hotel, preparing to meet this canny adversary after the G7 summit in Canada with his closest allies went so badly that analysts are now asking themselves whether the Trump administration is actually trying to wreck the Western alliance. He and his top advisors heaped unprecedented abuse on their host, the Canadian Prime Minister. Meantime, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was telling journalists here that they plan to offer Kim unprecedented guarantees. Here's a little more of what he had to say.
We're prepared to take what will be security assurances that are different, unique, than have been provided, that America has been willing to provide previously. In each of those two countries, there are only two people that can make decisions of this magnitude, and those two people are going to be sitting in a room together.
And this extraordinary summit is being hosted by Singapore, as we said. The leader of this prosperous and tiny country met with both Kim and Trump before they met each other. And Prime Minister Hsien tells me what he learned from them and what their meeting could mean for this region and the world. We sat down at the Istana, or the palace, for an exclusive and surprisingly candid interview. Prime Minister Lee, welcome to the program.
Hello.
How important is it for Singapore to be hosting this summit?
We are the hosts. We are the tea and coffee pourers. We don't participate in the summit. We don't have an influence on what's discussed or on the outcome. But we hope that by providing a venue which is neutral, which is agreeable to both sides, we enable a productive summit to take place.
What does it mean for you to host this in terms of the security of this area? You're quite far, You're quite far. You're 10 hours by plane from the Korean peninsula.
Fewer by missile.
That's a good way to put it. Fewer by missile. Have you felt that you've lived under the shadow of this threat?
No, our concern is not that we are going to be targeted. We are not participants in the Korean tensions. But if there are tensions in Northeast Asia on the Korean peninsula, is going to destabilize the region, and Southeast Asia is not going to be let off scot-free, nor the world. So I think if this meeting can have a constructive outcome and we can have contributed something to that, I think it's a duty we should do.
So let me ask you for a little bit of vital color about the main participants. That would be the leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, who you've met, and also...
Only once, yesterday.
Exactly. So I would like to ask you what you took away from that meeting. What did he say to you about this moment, about a potential shift in North Korea's trajectory?
Well, he's a confident young leader. He came and he said, well, thank you for hosting, and we hope that it will be a historic occasion. I think he wants to go on to a new path. What he's prepared to deal and how an agreement can be worked out, well, that's a complicated matter. But I think he has an intention to do something, and that's why he's meeting Donald Trump.
He's quoted as saying that this was arranged like a family affair. I mean, he seems to be really complimentary. He said that that this could be Singapore cementing itself in the history of peace and prosperity in the region.
Well, he was being generous in his opening remarks. We are just the host. It's an opportunity for the two sides to meet. We provide a safe place. We make sure that the security is arranged. We make sure the world can be here. And we hope that in this environment they'll have a sense of the way the region is, the potential for the prosperity and the stability and the security in the region, in Asia, and what that can mean for the world. And therefore a sense of the responsibility they have, two sides, to come to some kind of a constructive outcome.
What about President Trump? You met with him after he landed, a few hours after you met with Kim Jong-un. It's not the first time you've met President Trump.
I've met him before. I gave him lunch today.
I think everybody around the world has been quite stunned by the rhetoric, the tweets, the whole atmosphere around the G7 summit.
Yes.
About how he behaved to his allies,
yes.
about the
yes.
name-calling
yes.
on Twitter afterwards. So I guess, what kind of Trump, which Trump were you prepared to meet, and which Trump did you meet for lunch?
Well, I think it's the same Donald Trump whom I've met on previous occasions. He speaks his mind. He has opinions. He has his views, and very firmly held views on trade, on the ways America has been taken advantage of, and the way he wants to make America great again. And I understand. I mean, that is what he stood for. That's why he was elected president.
Do you think America has been taken advantage of?
I would take a different perspective. I think America deliberately took a very generous approach at a time when it was a very dominant player in the international scene, much more dominant than it is today, after the war and for decades after the war. And they took a generous approach with a Marshall Plan in Europe, with their maintenance of the Pax Americana in the Asia Pacific, in order to allow other countries to prosper, so that America could benefit from a stable and prosperous world and not be back in the 1930s, which led to the 1940s, which led to a lot of blood and treasure spilled by America. And that formula worked for America and has worked until now. Now, today, America's a much smaller share of the world economy. New players are coming up. The Chinese, their economy, by some measures, are same size as America's, by others maybe half the size. Indians are coming up, the other emerging economies are coming up. So some Americans are asking themselves, do I still have to carry this burden for the world? Why can't I just calculate for myself? Is it sensible for me to make all these services, sacrifices, what some scholars call global public goods, between nations, to uphold the system so that everybody can benefit from it? And it's a legitimate question how you want to rebalance the benefits and what America how America can get more out of it. But to abandon the whole system and to say, well, I'm now going to go win-lose, item by item, and I want to win every single match, but I really don't have an overall view of the global game. That's a very different kind of world which America will find itself in if it goes that way over several terms of a presidency.
Did you express that to the president?
Well, I think he knows our position. He has his views, so I think he's heard that from many people. I didn't feel that it was my place to try and shift him dramatically.
And yet, what the president does and what America does can dramatically shift your region. Just on the denuclearization, what did he say to you about what he expected to come out of this one-day summit, one-day meeting? He said he'll know within a few minutes if Kim Jong-un is serious, if there's a deal to be made.
Well, he didn't say very much because his officials are still negotiating what is to come out from the meeting. But I think he is hoping for a positive outcome. And the key thing is he needs to assess whether Mr. Kim is serious or not. And if he's serious, I think something can be worked out. And if it's not worked out immediately, you come back at it, and at some point you'll be able to reach a consensus or reach some kind of an agreement, if not immediately. But if you assess that the other side is not serious, well, then you don't have a basis to start. And that is an assessment which I think both sides will have to make of the other.
It depends on what each side is serious about, though, obviously. I mean, each side has their priorities. The question is, are
the objectives may not be the same, but are they serious about wanting some kind of a deal? And if so, then are they prepared to have give and take, to put something on the table, to ask for something in return? And eventually you get something and the other side gets something, and you also have to think about the people who are not at the table but watching anxiously, the Chinese and the Japanese and the Russians, and something can be worked out if you really want to come to an outcome. If you don't want an outcome, you just want a photo op, and then you go home and either you beat your chest and declare victory on an empty document, or you go home and say the other guy is you can't do business with him, and that's why this path leads to a dead end. We do something totally different, which is not so benign.
You're talking about the military option.
That's a different model. It could be a military option, and there are a lot of things you do short of a military option. I mean, there are many sanctions which have been applied over the last few years and months.
You said that a lot of the key players in the region also have their agendas. They're not at the table. So in short, since you have great relations with all these people in this region, what does China want?
I think China would like the Korean Peninsula to be denuclearized. I think they are anxious about North Koreans having a nuclear capability, because it can lead to escalation which is not within their control. You could have escalation in terms of tensions and conflict. You could have escalations in terms of the South Koreans thinking that they too should have such capabilities, which they have indeed on previous occasions thought so.
An arms race, another step up?
No, not just an arms race, nuclearization by other countries. So the South Koreans are going nuclear, the Japanese can go nuclear. In fact, their cabinet secretary is on record saying that their constitution doesn't prevent them from working on nuclear weapons.
Do you think China...
And that may not stop there. I mean, the Taiwanese have nuclear power plants and they have thoughts too. So it is very destabilizing even if you confine yourself to East Asia. And if you look beyond that to the Middle East and what it could mean for Middle Eastern players watching this happen and watching the precedents which are being set, I think it can be very troublesome for the world.
Well, you brought up the Middle East, so I need to ask you, given that it's totally relevant right now, given that the United States, the big powers, and Iran came to an arms control agreement in 2015, and that the President of the United States has pulled the US out of it, which may kill the deal because of sanctions and secondary sanctions, etc. How risky is that?
I'm not an expert in this. When you go in, you can have a lot of arguments. Do you want to do this? Do you not want to do this? But one way or the other, Mr. Obama decided to do this, together with the Chinese, the Russians, and the Europeans. And he did it in a way which didn't get congressional sanction. I mean, he didn't need congressional sanction. So the JCPOA is not quite a treaty, which means it can be undone without congressional sanction. But having made this move and gone in, a fact has been created. You are now in a new situation. If you undo it, can you go back to status quo ante? Or will you be in a new situation different from where you were before? And I don't think it's easy to go back to status quo ante, because the sanctions, the UN impositions, the consensus which was built up internationally is not there anymore to go back to the status quo.
You know, what you're saying is that President Trump, who wants to put on even more pressure on Iran by pulling the US out, will find he won't be able to.
Well, he may be able to, and if you read what his officials say, they say, well, we are powerful, we are the United States, and we will do it to banks which do business with America, and companies which do business using banks in America, and they all have to pay attention. And you might be able to have considerable influence this way, on this issue. But if on many issues the U.S. is going it alone, that's a different kind of world which the U.S. will be facing. And you are very powerful, but I think your influence will be less than if you went in together with others.
What about China? There's an ongoing fisticuffs, if you like, at least verbal fisticuffs, threats of tariffs and counter-tariffs with China. Chinese Foreign Ministry said about all the flip-flopping, In international relations, every time you change your face and turn your back is another loss and squandering for your country's credibility. So, talking about the United States and its credibility, it's about as far as the Chinese have come in putting some color on what's going on. What is your assessment of what's happening and the health of this region and the health of the global economy as a result of this?
Well, I think there are different layers to this problem. Donald Trump's starting point is that he has a big trade deficit with the Chinese, between US and China, and that's a bad thing, and he wants to fix that. And he wants the Chinese to open up and buy more from America. And if you are spending more than you are producing, that means you will have a trade deficit. If you are spending less than you are producing, that means you will save money, you'll run a trade surplus. So America is spending more than you're producing. Why are you able to do that? Because you are the most powerful country in the world and everybody else wants to hold US dollars. So it gives you an expensive, exorbitant privilege, as somebody called it. You have to look at it at a more fundamental level. Why is America running an overall imbalance? And it's not mainly because of trade restrictions. That's one problem. But there's another layer to this, which is that China entered the WTO in 2001, and it was negotiated in the years before that, at a time when it was 4+% of the world's GDP. Today, it's 15% of the world's GDP. So it's what was agreed then with a quite small player is now in effect with a very big player. And what was politically wearable then may or may not be politically wearable now. And therefore there is a case to say, let's talk, let's work out a new basis. But I think when you talk over trade issues like this, it's much better to talk in a multilateral framework. There's a WTO, there's a basis for many countries to come together to work in accordance with international rules, rules which give space for all countries, big and small, to operate under the same framework.
You talk about
which may not be the case if America just goes with China, which is why people say if elephants fight, the grass suffers, and when they make love, it's disastrous.
Well, again, that's another nice saying of yours.
Others have said it before.
But so let me ask you, it catches Singapore in the middle a bit, doesn't it? I mean, you have to balance your relations with the United States and China. How difficult does it get for Singapore when the US and China have increasing difficulties?
We have to be on our toes. We are friends with both. We'd like to continue to be friends with both. And it's easiest for us to do that when the two have good relations. When the two have tensions between them and there's a feeling that you're either with me or against me, well, then it becomes harder. But we will keep on trying.
The Economist cover this week shows President Trump riding a wrecking ball. And they call him Demolition Man. And the wrecking ball actually happens to be the planet Earth. How concerned are you at this point right now that campaign pledges are being translated into policy, that protectionism is being implemented, that go it alone is being implemented by the United States, and that the president doesn't seem to agree with the notion of the global institutions, the global order as we know it?
Well, it is a very radical stance for a U.S. administration to take, but it's not just the president's perspective, it's the perspective of a significant number of people in America who have elected him. They may or may not numerically be a majority, but they are not negligible. And in the American political system, they have expressed their view, and this administration is carrying that out. Why is there such a view? Well, you can have a lot of explanations, but one of them is that these are people who have felt that the existing system wasn't working for them, that the existing elites in America were not serving them, and they do want the system remade. They don't quite know how, they are not sure what is wrong, but the status quo is no good, so let's change.
But is this the way to change it? I mean, economists are saying, how can you change something that doesn't exist? Over the weekend, Paul Krugman and others have said this idea of these massive trade imbalances, or rather trade deficits, this idea that it always harms the United States, this idea that America is the piggy bank of the world that's being robbed. is not actually in accordance with the economic facts and the financial facts.
That is so. That is so. But it is a problem when you have people who think, who believe this, who have this perspective on the world, and you have to have, a country has to have policies which are domestically sustainable, and if it's not domestically sustainable, you have a problem.
But Mr. Prime Minister, what if these policies that the President wants to deliver for his own voters break the rest of the world? That's what I'm trying to get at. Demolition man.
The rest of the world watch what the U.S. do and how the U.S. vote with great concern. It affects us, we have no vote. And that's the way the things are.
Well, that's pretty blunt. And how do you, okay. I don't know what the next question after that is. How do you try to convince the President, having seen what happened at the G7, all these other leaders try to give him the maths, the facts and the figures, the policies, not just the politics, and it went nowhere.
I think this is something which has to play out within the American body politic. I mean, there are Americans who think otherwise. There are many congressmen, senators who believe otherwise, even Republicans. And John McCain is not the only one who has a very different view of the world. And it has to play out within the American political system. Yours is a system which has elaborate checks and balances, and it is meant to be able to correct itself and prevent policy from being taken to unwise extremes. And we hope
how are they
that
doing
in time
so far,
it will come back. I think it takes time. I mean, this is 1.5 years. The President has an agenda. He's carrying out his agenda. The midterms are coming this year. That will be one sign. And then further electoral tests will come down the road.
So I do want to ask you, because we are in an era of popular pushback. We see it all over the world. We saw it in the Arab Spring. We saw it in the populist waves that we've just been discussing, whether it's in the United States, whether it's Brexit, whether it's around Europe and elsewhere. You do have a pretty strict internal logic to Singapore. You've made a little bit of liberalization in terms of some areas of free speech and others, but not dramatic political plurality. Where do you think Singapore is going? Do you see any flexibility in the future? Can you open up more?
I think when you say strict political logic, it's rather a loaded term, because what you really mean is, why are we so repressive? Well, the answer is we aren't. Why is a political scene like this? Because that's the way Singaporeans have voted, and it's the outcome of the elections. When does it change? It changes when the Singaporean electorate decide that this government is not serving their interests, cease to support this PAP team, and perhaps, hopefully, support another team which will serve them better. And then it'll be a different scene. It's not the way it is because we are clamping down and preventing other people from contesting elections. In the last elections, every single seat was contested. And if you looked at the popular vote, we had 70% of the popular vote. So I don't think you can say it's because...
but there's not a whole lot of tolerance for freedom of speech or public protest.
You can say anything you want. You can ask me anything you want.
Well, let me ask you. Last autumn, you prosecuted an activist by the name of Jolo Van Wam for holding public gatherings without a permit, including one that included the famous Hong Kong activist Joshua Wong. So, again, these are, political, cultural, democratic questions.
There are arrangements. There's a speaker's corner. Actually, it's an enormous speaker's field. Anytime you feel you want to relieve your soul of some important thought, you can go there and spout forth. But if you insist on going places where you're not supposed to do this, well, then the rules have to apply. You want to put stuff up on the internet, you can publish anything you want. The blogs are there, they exist, multiples. You are still subject to the laws of sedition and libel and contempt. But you say what you want, and people do say whatever they want. And if you research what is written, you will see that actually it's quite a lively discussion.
You may laugh, you may not laugh, but when I came here, when I told people I was coming here, they wanted to know whether you still have very strict chewing gum and spitting rules. They remember the American who was heavily penalized for chewing gum.
Yes, we caned him. He wasn't heavily penalized for chewing gum.
He was caned?
No, Michael Fay was not for chewing gum.
Okay.
Michael Fay went around vandalizing vehicles. scratching vehicles and causing a lot of damage. And he was caned for that. You don't get caned for chewing gum.
Finally, how did it come about? Did you get a phone call? How was Singapore chosen for this summit?
I don't know how the decision was made. We know that they were looking at possibilities and they sounded us out. We said, well, if you think that it is, we can be a good venue, we are prepared to step up and we will be helpful. And then we didn't hear anything more for a while, and after some time they narrowed it down, and eventually they said, yes, we'd like to come to Singapore, which I presume both sides said, yes, we would like to come to Singapore, because it's a joint decision. So we started preparing, then the summit was off, but we didn't call off our preparations, and the summit is on again, and we think we'll be prepared by the time it happens.
Prime Minister Lee, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
A roller coaster indeed. And still ahead, President Trump and Kim Jong-un will soon exchange handshakes. But will that lead to meaningful change? We will ask the man who until recently spearheaded diplomatic efforts with Pyongyang for the United States. And courting an adversary while going after allies, the European view on the disruption at the G7 summit. Stay with us.
Support for Amanpour comes from our friends at Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Chances are you're confident when it comes to your work, your hobbies, and your life. Rocket Mortgage gives you that same level of confidence when it comes to buying a home or refinancing your existing home loan. Rocket Mortgage is simple, allowing you to fully understand all the details and be confident you're getting the right mortgage for you. To get started, go to rocketmortgage.com/Amanpour. Equal housing lender, licensed in all 50 states, NMLSconsumeraccess.org number 3030. Been putting off buying new glasses? Zenni Optical offers a huge variety of high-quality, stylish frames and state-of-the-art optics, starting at just $6.95. We've got all the great frame styles you want in materials like titanium, carbon fiber, and high-luster acetate. Plus, Zenni offers prescription glasses and sunglasses. So at this great price, you can build your eyewear wardrobe. You can get 10% off your entire order with code 360. So visit Zenni, Zenni, today at zennioptical.com and use code 360.
Hey, it's Alicia Malone. I am the host of the Filmstruck podcast, an audio playground for lovers of cinema, both past and present. On the newest episode, I sit down with Morgan Neville to talk about his new film, Won't You Be My Neighbor, about the beloved television personality, Mr. Rogers.
Love is a noun like struggle. You know, that these are things you have to fight for, and he fought for kindness.
Take tissues to see this movie and subscribe to hear more wherever you get your podcasts. Bye!
Welcome back to a special edition of our program. We're live from Singapore for more of our coverage of the historic summit between the U.S. President Donald Trump and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. We have just heard from Singapore's Prime Minister Hsien Loong, who described his impressions of Kim and Trump ahead of their sit-down. My next guest is Joseph Hsien. He was America's special representative for North Korea policy until he left the government earlier this year. He says the U.S. policy has changed substantially over the past few weeks, but is it moving too far, too fast? We will ask. Ambassador Hsien, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Can I start by asking you, if you were still in the government, what would your job be around this summit? What would you be doing before and during?
I expect I would be negotiating with my North Korean counterparts towards getting what we call joint communique, joint declaration, joint statement, that is essentially telling everyone what the results of the summit will be.
Now, to the best of your knowledge, do you believe that they have negotiated that joint communique? For several hours before the summit is due to start, we were hearing that it's still a little unclear.
It is still a little unclear. Certainly, they've had many sessions. They've had sessions in DMZ in Korea. They've had sessions here. And I think we've had one session today, the last session. And it was also discussed, of course, when Kim Yong-chol, the North Korean spy chief, was meeting Pompeo in New York and also met with President Trump in Washington only a week or so ago. Yes, so they have been discussing quite a bit.
But they still, we understand, are quite far apart, or at least they have been. And we're just watching these pictures of Kim Jong-un doing a walkabout not far from where we're sitting right now. This was a few hours ago. But I have to say, I was stunned. You've never seen a reclusive leader, abroad, doing that kind. Usually their trips aren't even publicized until they've left and they're back in Pyongyang. And here he is, as if he's just really a pro on the international stage, taking selfies. Just describe for a moment the change that has come over this reclusive leader called a dictator, a violator of human rights, a developer of nuclear weapons, a threatener of the West and the region. All of a sudden, he's Mr. Let's do deal with.
It has been an amazing transformation, and you and I have talked about this before. And really, it started, I would say, with the summit with President Moon. And there we saw, walking across what we call demarcation line. And then from thereafter, he had a second meeting with President Moon and 2 meetings with Xi Jinping. I mean, Christian, so he has transformed himself from, as you say, a reclusive leader from an isolated state to someone who is a world stage. And, we're in Singapore. I was riding a taxi cab just today, and they were, the taxi driver was showing amazing surprise. His popularity in South Korea has gone rocket sky high, and you, as you say, you saw him today walking, just around the marina, just behind us. And I think to me, what it points to is he has decided that he is going to change. Is it to the change that we expect him to change? I mean, that's the key question that will be addressed.
Well, is it? I mean, you've talked to the group around him. You've been in charge of North Korea policy. What does Kim Jong-un want? First of all, he's already scored a major victory, right? He's on the international stage. He's going to meet with the President of the United States. He is legitimized now.
He is legitimized, he's popular, and I would even say he's respected, certainly by many other leaders.
Honestly, I'm banging my head. I can't even believe we're talking like this.
Yeah. I mean, this is unbelievable. And he has scored a major first-round victory. What does he want? I mean, of course, we want to test the claim that he can change. We want to test President Moon, South Korean president's claim that he will denuclearize. But how quickly, how completely, how verifiably, that we don't know, and that's what we're going to find out.
Well, then, from the perspective of the United States, Secretary of State Pompeo has again said the sanctions will remain, the maximum pressure will remain until we have this complete, verifiable, irreversible disarmament, denuclearization. On the other hand, we've just played a soundbite of what he told reporters today, basically saying that the U.S. will offer unprecedented security guarantees and that the only 2 people who matter in this whole business are the 2 leaders who will be sitting in the room together. They can make the guarantees and implement the guarantees. What is an unprecedented security guarantee? What can President Trump offer that neither President Obama nor President Bush nor President Clinton offered? Because they all guaranteed security for the Kim family.
Well, again, I don't think, I mean, this is a question. What is it that President Trump can offer Kim Jong-un so that he is convinced that he's safe, his regime is safe, his family is safe? Earlier on, you remember John Bolton talked about Libya model.
But they've gone very quiet about that.
They've gone very quiet, but that is relevant, actually, because he did denuclearize. 8 years later, there was an uprising, internal uprising, and he was killed by his own folks. Can we or can anyone truly guarantee that that will not happen? I don't think so. And also, I'm not sure that is what Kim Jong-un is looking for. I think he's looking to stay well beyond, certainly well beyond President Trump, well beyond, and have the deterrence to defend him.
So he wants to keep his nuclear weapons?
I think ultimately I cannot imagine him giving up nuclear weapons quickly.
Okay, so quickly means what?
I mean, quite honestly, I don't want to put timeline on it, but there was a piece by Sid Hacker, very respected,
incredibly
nuclear
respected,
scientist.
the best, yeah.
He said even with full cooperation, complete denuclearization would take more than 10 years. That's the full cooperation. We don't have full cooperation, so I cannot see a genuine path to fully denuclearize North Korea in a decade. However, that's not to say situation cannot improve.
So,
and that's what we're here for, to improve.
Exactly, to improve the situation. So given that, and given that's what the president says he actually wants, complete denuclearization, destruction, etc., of their capability, can I ask you whether you have any qualms about the President of the United States and the leader of North Korea? From what we've been told, they will meet alone with just translators for the significant portion of the summit. What are the risk-reward benefits of that? Is there an official record of what will happen there? Will we know exactly what happened, what was said, who said what?
Typically, there would be no takers, and typically even one-on-one is not truly one-on-one, And when we talk about one-on-one, if it's true one-on-one, it will be a short meeting.
No, but it's just with translators. That's what we're told.
Well, we'll have to see.
But if it was just that, are there risks to that?
I think there are risks to that because you don't know what you've agreed to. And there will be recrimination and blames. I would at least hope, for example, Secretary Pompeo would be there and his counterpart, Lee Young-ho, would be there from North Korea. So I think it is wise, especially in a meeting as difficult as denuclearization meeting, to have people so then they can talk about it, I mean, I think that's important.
So given your position as the former special envoy for this process, you would think it would be unwise for them just to be alone for a significant period of time with translators?
I would certainly hope there would be someone else who would say, this is the record, this is what we have agreed to, and not just depend completely on the memory of the leaders.
Or on tweets or on their national press when they get back home, like in Pyongyang or wherever. What is the best that President Trump can walk away with? He has said that because it's him and because he's the deal maker and he has all this experience, he will know within several minutes of meeting Leader Kim whether there is a deal to be had, whether he's serious, and whether he's made a historic shift.
I don't know whether it's completely possible, as you said, but within a minute. I'm actually...
2 minutes, he said. Yeah.
I'm reminded of an episode. Do you remember in 2001, George W. Bush first summit meeting with President Putin, where he said, I looked him in the eye, and he felt that he was trustworthy.
Yeah, he said he saw into his soul, didn't he?
He saw into his soul. It's tough to see.
But to be fair, President Putin did help President Bush a lot. It was the Iraq War that soured all of that stuff, and withdrawing from the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile Treaty and all of that.
It is tough to see into someone's soul,
But maybe you don't need to. You just need to get a verifiable agreement to do something. So here we are getting together. Lay out for us what will happen post-Singapore. We're obviously not going to solve this in one day or one meeting.
And I think President Trump and Secretary Pompeo have really backtracked quite a bit. And now I think the expectations are more realistic. That is, there will be a process. There will be more meetings. There will be discussions. It's not going to be done in one go. So what I would expect is very quickly they begin working level discussions. You could have more than one track. You could have a denuclearization track. You could have peace treaty track. You could have diplomatic normalization track. So for example, an early, I would say, big move might be to open liaison offices, diplomatic liaison offices, for us in Pyongyang and another one in Washington. and then also, for example, memorialize some steps that North Korea has already taken. So those can all happen quite quickly.
Can I just ask you a quickie? Because we have been told that they want a peace declaration. The United States would like to do that. Obviously, a peace treaty takes a long time to negotiate. Again, what is the risks and rewards of offering the leader right now a formal peace treaty without seeing any of that verifiable disarmament and dismantlement?
One immediate effect is we probably take off military option from the table. When you are starting peace treaty negotiation or make it a, end of war declaration, that means war is over. You immediately take off essentially a war option or military option. Second, there are issues like what happens to UN command that is still in South Korea.
The U.S. troops?
What happens to U.S. troops? What happens to Combined Forces Command? So there are reasons why peace treaty has to take time, again, step by step. And also, what do we get for peace treaty? I think it would be a mistake to do a peace treaty before denuclearization.
And very quickly, I'm going to turn to my next guest. Do you regret having resigned when you did, given all this is happening now?
Well, that's a toughie, Christian. Obviously, I'm a diplomat. It is very exciting to be here. But it is also great to be here with you,
Explaining to us.
Yes.
Ambassador Joseph Hsien, we appreciate your perspective and your analysis.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much indeed.
Good to be here.
And let us now turn to U.S. relations with the allies, who were left dumbfounded this weekend after President Trump suddenly withdrew from the joint G7 summit communique. He was lashing out at Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and he threatened to stop trading with many of the others, with the G7 countries, over what he called ridiculous and unacceptable tariffs on American goods. The president's chief economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, later told CNN that his stance was partly about the upcoming summit with Kim Jong-un. Take a listen.
On the eve of this, he is not going to permit any show of weakness on the trip to negotiate with North Korea, nor should he.
So this was about North Korea?
Of course it was, in large part.
So what are the allies to do in the face of all of this hostility? Joining me now from London to discuss is the Washington Post columnist and Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Anne Applebaum. And from Berlin, we have Norbert Röttgen, who is chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee in Germany's parliament, and he's a member of Chancellor Angela Merkel's CDU party. Can I first turn to you, Mr. Röttgen? What did you make of Larry Kudlow basically saying that, don't worry about all that abuse that the president heaped on everybody at the G7, that it was really about showing a tough hand to Kim Jong-un? How does that go down with you?
Yeah, there seems to be a very strange idea of strength. We consider strength to contribute to unity, to try to shape complicated international relations, to give unified, tough answers. But instead of that, the American president disrupted afterwards a meeting after having departed from this meeting. And I think globally this has not really made a strong impression about the foreign policy behavior of the American president. So it was rather the opposite of strength, but it was really weakness.
Well, you're using a word that he threw at the Canadian Prime Minister, and I was actually dumbfounded. I have never seen that kind of abuse hurled at allies from any U.S. president at any of these joint summits. How surprised was the Chancellor by all of this, and how does she come back to engaging on very real issues with the U.S. leader?
I think in general, and before the summit had taken place, there was not that much room for getting surprised by the president, because we have seen now for more than 1 year how his foreign policy behavior looks like. So everybody was well prepared for a kind of disaster. Then eventually one had a feeling of relief that a catastrophe seemed to be avoided, that there was some agreement, also of course disagreement, and then after everybody thought it went quite well under the circumstances, then came the strike from Air Force One and the declaration that the President and the United States retracted from a joint communique which was given before. So I think at the end everybody was really surprised that it eventually even happened, the catastrophe after the closing of the meeting in a way.
Mm-hmm. So let me turn to you, Anne Applebaum. You write a lot about alliances, whether it's NATO, whether it's the entire sort of global world order that the U.S. helped to create, or in fact did create, with its allies. And you've seen the front cover of The Economist this week, which pretty much spells out in pictures that this is a wrecking ball, that this is a demolition man. How do you react to what happened at the G7 summit?
So I have two separate reactions. One is that to remember that there are fundamentals underneath Trump and underneath Merkel that remain solid and keep going. And actually, as somebody who's been warning about the decline of the alliance and the potential of Trump as a disruptor, I really felt it was important this week to talk about that. I happened by chance to have been last week in Poland, where I watched a NATO Special Forces operation underway, and I saw 13 nations working together. I saw thousands of troops and soldiers and people and planners cooperating. All of that is still happening, and I think it's important to remember that those fundamentals of the alliance and the preparation continue. Of course, you know, it's a little bit like the alliance is a chicken with its head cut off. All the elements of it are still there. The people are in play and so on, but the leadership is gone, and the question is what that means and how it looks to the rest of the world. I would say the one danger, particularly of the juxtaposition of the G7 with the Korea summit, is that it certainly looks to the outside world as if Trump is reorienting America ideologically. So we fight with our friends and our old friends, who are the democracies, and we make new friends who are the autocracies. And Trump seems to be, you know, the risk is that he comes out of this summit smiling and happy and waving some kind of agreement, you know, bogus or otherwise. And that's his new best friend is Kim, and we're not speaking to Justin Trudeau anymore, which is peculiar and which sends a very clear message to our allies and enemies around the world.
So let me just pin you down on, you said that, you know, you've been watching many of the lower levels below the elected leaders continuing to work in the areas that the alliance, in the vital areas. But there are people who say that if anybody was in doubt, this Canada summit was the first shot in an attempt to disrupt, I mean, some people might say destroy, the Western alliance. I mean, the administration wouldn't even use the term the global rules-based order, or whatever the term is. It had to be a global order. There just seems to be a huge amount of hostility.
Look, I agree with you. Trump, all of his life has been hostile to the alliance. He spoke 10 and 20 years ago about NATO as a waste of money and about allies as taking away from us. He expresses an incredible amount of ignorance even about trade. Before coming on this program, I looked up some of the statistics. You know, actually, including services, U.S. has a trade surplus with Canada. We export more in agriculture than we import. We even export more dairy products than we import. And we know that dairy products is one of the things that he kept mentioning. So, you know, he's deliberately smashing something. At the same time, he hasn't told U.S. Army Europe to retreat. He hasn't told, you know, American democracy promotion organizations to stop working. They're all still there. They're all functioning. You know, the question is whether, you know, can they hold on during this period of difficulty? Will he eventually turn on his own civil servants and on his own army? That we don't know yet. But it's important to remember that there's a line he hasn't yet crossed, and to pay attention, because if he does cross that, then we're yet in another situation.
So, Norbert Röttgen, from where you sit in Berlin, from where the German government sits, and it hears about tariffs, it hears about potential auto industry tariffs coming next. You yourself have always said that it's best to employ restraint while dealing with the public manifestations of the Trump administration's policies and rhetoric. Is restraint still enough? How does the Chancellor now deal with the idea of auto tariffs, for instance?
In general, I would say that our approach is as long as it is possible to limit the damage. Damage limitation instead of escalation or to increase the damage is how we want to deal with it. We want to intensify the relationship with the many who hold this transatlantic relationship dear and consider it to be a necessity. However, the steel and aluminium tariffs are not a nice thing, but eventually I think economically we can live with that. If Trump went for the European and German car industry, this certainly then would affect a strategic German industry in particular, and this would create a real serious case. And I would say I have always advocated damage limitation, but I would say this then would be the case beyond only damage limitation. It's then a really serious case, and I think we then are beyond the situation that we can say we are at the brink of a trade war. This would then be the step further.
So I was struck by Chancellor Merkel's language. She called, what happened sort of not just staggering, but also somewhat depressing. And of course, she has again been accused of not leading Germany to its correct 2% of GDP NATO contribution. And, she fired back against that a while back, saying that you guys have dealt with all the refugees over 2015. Can you tell us how you're going to address that? Because a NATO summit is going to come up and you're going to be told again that you're not paying your way.
Yes, I think there are things that do not remain true and right, even if Donald Trump makes the case for these things. And we have some shortcomings, talking now about Germany. We have to do more in regard to defense spending. I think we have to invest more in order to care for our German European security. We have to draw conclusions out of the end of the Cold War, which is now nearly 3 decades behind us. So we have to work on our shortcomings, and we have to do more on this area. Perhaps in a way Donald Trump could also serve as a trigger that we accelerate and more fastly live up to the level of responsibility which Germany surely has to do and we have there to deliver in order to be credible, in order to bear our burden and to serve our responsibility. And I've always advocated for that, and perhaps this case has now become a little bit easier to make because we see the disruption and the challenges coming from the other side of the Atlantic.
Mm-hmm. And Anne, to you, were you stunned, or what reaction did you have when the president said that Russia should be back at the G7 table, that it should be the G8?
Look, one of the great oddities of American foreign policy right now is trying to understand what is our policy towards Russia. And this actually illustrates the point I was making before, that there are civil servants and diplomats who are running a traditional or a recognizable anyway American foreign policy. We had an actually very good reaction of the American government to the poisoning the Russian poisoning of a Russian citizen who was living in Britain. A few weeks ago, we had the expulsion of diplomats. We have the maintenance of the sanctions against Russia, even in the face of some Europeans who are beginning to wonder whether the sanctions are really working. And at the same time, we had these extraordinary one-off statements by the president, which seem to lead in other directions. And so the question lots of people ask is, what is the real American foreign policy? Is it what the Americans do and the diplomats are doing, or is it what the president tweets? Sometimes I listen to American foreign policy people talking, civil servants and diplomats, and they sometimes talk as if Trump didn't exist. And there's a piece of this State Department that's acting that way. The question is, for how long can we maintain this dual-track attitude?
It's really fascinating. Anne Applebaum and Norbert Röttgen, thank you so much for joining us to talk about this side of the story tonight. And that is it for our program. Remember, you can listen to our podcast at any time. You can always see us online at amanpour.com and follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for watching, and goodbye from Singapore.
Before you go, we wanted to let you know that we just launched the ability for anyone to advertise on CNN podcasts. You're just a few clicks away from reaching millions of people in a way that you never have before. Advertise for a business, event, or kick off an awareness campaign for your brand. Start today at purewinning.com/CNN. Integrating podcasts into your